Hello, everybody. I am Reverend Dr. Sarah Griffith Lund, she, her pronouns. It's wonderful to be here today. Thank you to Amy for this invitation. And just to say, I appreciate your commitment and dedication to the ministry with youth and families and children. That's part of my passion as well. I am ordained in the Disciples of Christ Christian Church tradition and the United Church of Christ. I've been ordained over 20 years and served congregations from Brooklyn, New York to Minneapolis, Minnesota to New Smyrna Beach, Florida. Did some judicatory work. I was a regional minister in the state of Florida doing um, revitalization ministry. And then I was in administration in higher education. I was a vice president at Christian Theological Seminary and then really missed working with local churches. So now I'm back in the local church as senior pastor at First Congregational of Indianapolis, where I am located. But also at the same time, I was called to serve my denomination, the United Church of Christ. We're based out of Cleveland, Ohio, in a new role that they created. It's a minister for disabilities and mental health justice. So, in addition to pastoring a local church, I serve my denomination part time. And for me, that feels really good to have a foot strongly rooted in the local church, but also a foot in national advocacy and education. And I really feel like that makes my brain happy to think about, systemic things and local things. And throughout all of that, I've navigated my call as a writer. And so, really been blessed to have the support to write books. And so, I'm excited to share my books with you on the topic of mental health. What I've learned for me is there's so much power in telling our true stories, and especially as relates to mental health, mental illness, mental health diagnoses, there is still a lot of stigma. And so, what we found is that even though we need more insurance, we need more access to healthcare, we need better healthcare professionals, there's wait lists to get into therapy, all of those challenges, still the biggest challenge is stigma. We have self stigma, acknowledging things about our realities to ourself. But then there's stigma in society and in the church. And there's a lot in the church. And so I've been part of ministry movements to help destigmatize mental health. And one of the most powerful ways we can do that is by taking off the mask and say, you know what, me too. And just normalizing the conversations. So the next slide lifts up the work in my first book that came out in 2014. And let me tell you, I was terrified about this book because I had gotten so comfortable silencing mental illness in my life and my family because I thought the church required me to be silent in order to be acceptable. And this idea in the church of being perfect as Christ is perfect, especially for church leaders and clergy, that we have to be pure without sin, without flaw, especially around mental health, because mental health impacts our thinking, our behaviors, how we minister, and how we are perceived. If we are acceptable. So I know in a lot of churches, there's a psychological evaluation that clergy have to do to see if you're fit for ministry. And I was so afraid that if the church knew about the serious chronic mental illness in my family, that they would say I was unfit. And so I really kept a lot of these things, didn't lie, but I just didn't tell the whole story. And so I remember talking to the ordination board when they were vetting me, and they kind of summarized it and said, well, you've lived a charmed life, and that didn't sit well with me because I knew that they didn't know the whole story because I really kept a lot of it silent. So this is me breaking the silence about mental illness, family, and church. The true story is that my dad had serious chronic bipolar, and he also had an anosognosia, which is a symptom common in bipolar and schizophrenia where you lack the self insight. So I think it's like the brain's way of protecting itself. So he would have delusions, he would be paranoid, he would hear voices, he would sleep for days and then be awake for days, but he wasn't able to acknowledge his brain was functioning differently. He kept denying there was a problem. So, what that meant for our family is that he had a job as the animal hospital director and doctor, and we had a comfortable middle class life. But he couldn't work after a while, so he lost his job. We couldn't pay the mortgage. We lost our house. And then he started to be paranoid about my siblings, and there was a violent experience where he was delusional, and a terrible accident happened with my brother getting run over by my dad, and it was very scary and sad. And so my mom realized, okay, this can't continue. So we had to flee from that dangerous situation, and I just was so scared, and just learned to hide everything. And so when we started our new life, fleeing from this with my dad, we went to church, but I never told anyone at church. My mom didn't tell anyone that, she had fled this scary experience, was now raising 5 kids as a single parent. We were on welfare. We were really homeless because we were just living with my grandma at the time. And that's when my mental health started to impact my physical health. And I started to get chronic stomach aches. I would wet the bed, in elementary school. And my mom took me to the doctor, and they said, there's nothing wrong with her. She's fine. So that was kind of that narrative. Oh, there's nothing wrong. You're fine. Even though there was a lot going on. We just didn't talk about it. So it turned out my brother, who was run over by my dad, he developed bipolar, had a suicidal episode at home. And when he was in high school, back in the 80s, my mom called 911. So they came to the house, they wrestled him to the ground and put him into handcuffs and put him in the squad car. And so that was also another thing I was ashamed about. My dad was homeless, hearing voices, my brother's in the psych ward, and we didn't say a word to anybody. No one in the church knew. Um, but it just kept feeling like we didn't have the support we needed because we didn't know how to talk about it. So I go into ministry, and when I am serving my first church, my dad dies suddenly, and I tell my congregation, my father's died, and they were shocked because I was a young adult, and so my dad was a younger person. And that's when I realized that the church didn't know any of the story about me and my father and our family. And I felt called by God to write the book because I was encouraged at a conference. Anna Carter Florence is a preaching professor, and she said, preaching is really about your testimony. Preaching is telling the God story. And she said, the world really needs to hear the God stories we were all young clergy women, of young clergy women. You need to tell your God story. The world needs to hear it. My dad had just died, so that's where I really felt that call to tell the God story about mental illness, because by that time it was my dad who really died from mental illness, my brother, who by that point was on full disability for bipolar, and then I had a cousin, my dad's nephew, who was um, sentenced to death because of a murder that he committed in a psychosis. And I was there when my cousin was executed. So I witnessed him on death row getting psychiatric care. The nurse was concerned about his anxiety, gave him anti anxiety meds, and then they executed him. And so, all of these things with serious mental illness, I really struggled with my faith. And I wondered, where's God? Where's God when my brother's in the psych ward on Christmas Eve? Where's God when my dad is delusional? And where was God when the state of Missouri executed my cousin, who had a lot of mental health problems and never got the help he needed? And part of the reason I didn't know where God was is because the church wasn't talking about it. The church wasn't talking about God in the psych ward, God with the mentally ill. And so this book for me was huge because I was so scared to tell these stories. But what I found out is that I'm not the only person. Like a lot of people, whether it's depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, we all know someone. And a lot of us have family members or we ourselves. So this is really how my ministry got started was through writing this first book. So the next slide is the second book. This was very hard to write because it turned out that when my husband and I were dating, I never told him about my family history with mental illness. He surely didn't tell me his. But soon in our marriage, we realized that our marriage was impacted by our mental health and how we were raised in families with chronic addiction, anxiety, and depression, and what that looked like in our marriage. And then as we became parents and how that impacted our family. So I don't know about you all, but we did premarital counseling, but never once in premarital counseling did the counselors say to us, "What is your family history of mental health?" Nobody asked us that question. But I think we really should. And so this book is really great for premarital counseling for anybody who lives with mental health in their marriages. It's lots of stories of different couples, including my story. Now, when I talked to my mom, who divorced my dad, she was so sad to divorce. She didn't want to divorce him, but people told her it was not safe to stay married. And so there are marriages that do need to end because they're not safe, whether physically or psychologically. But for those marriages where you do want to stay in the relationship, we just don't have enough support for marriages like mine. And so, this book was really important for my own healing, talking honestly about, how to navigate a marriage where someone has serious depressive disorder like my husband and sometimes can't get out of bed, can't function, how that impacts your intimacy, your romantic life. A lot of medications have really bad side effects on libido. So we don't talk about that either. But it can cause you to feel very alone in your marriage, very isolated. And so what can we do to provide more support? It's a tender topic, but one I have a soft place in my heart for. The next book, as I live my life and do ministry, in my family, there's generations of bipolar. My dad, my brother, and then as we all have kids, we're aware, okay, now our children might be carrying those similar genetics. And so we've been pretty careful about checking on grandkids, nieces and nephews, how they're doing. And so if you're in a family like mine, there's like high risk youth that you're paying more attention to, and then other youth are doing great, good at school, um, just got a lot of great things going on. And so we were shocked to learn that my niece, Sydney, who was straight A, honor roll, AP classes, played the cello, had lots of friends, very outgoing. She was trying to graduate from high school early because she was so bored. She wanted to do like the Peace Corps. We thought she'd be an astronaut, maybe the first woman president. Sydney was the favorite. Everybody loves Sydney. And we were devastated to learn that she died by suicide. Shocked we did not see the warning signs. And our hearts were ripped out of our chests. We had had suicidal experiences with my older brother and with some other people in my family and kind of knew the warning signs the way they exhibited them. But my niece really kept it hidden. And as we uncovered the layers of it, now we see what was going on. Her last school project was giving a presentation about a new nonprofit. The assignment was create a nonprofit model, and she created a nonprofit for mental health that was called Sentimental. And she wanted people to come into high schools and teach about depression and anxiety and let people know it's okay to get help. There's nothing to be ashamed of. that this is what depression is, this is what anxiety is, and this is how you can get help. Because she felt that there was still a lot of stigma, even among young people. And so that to me, looking back, was like, wow, she felt the stigma herself. And she tried to get help. She reached out to her school social worker, and they were so overwhelmed. It was a big public school, and they didn't get back to her. And then she texted her mom the morning she died, asking to go back into therapy. And so, part of my healing and recovery from that loss was to write this book, helping our churches and faith communities to have more open and honest conversations so that we can help prevent suicide. So, the next slide was a companion book that I'm so happy we did this. My publisher was like, wait a minute, have you thought about writing a book for youth? And I was like, that's a great idea. He's like, okay, can you get it to me in 2 weeks? And I was like, okay. So this was totally a God thing, a very simple version of a book for teens that talks about mental health, anxiety, depression. But also, in the 80s, there was a movement in the church around purity to save yourself from marriage. And some churches had kids do like a purity code or a promise to save their virginity until marriage. And they'd have like a promise ring, and I thought, well, why don't we do a similar pledge, but about saving their life? Like, what if we could talk to our kids and our youth about suicide prevention and ask them to promise if they're feeling overwhelmed, if they're having those thoughts, or their friends are, that they promise to let us know, to have a trusted adult that they can share that with. So I'm really proud of the way this book has helped have those conversations across the country. This has been over 10,000, 15,000 copies have been shared. And I think that's like 15,000 lives that we have saved. It saved my son. Um, I wrote this book and shared it with him, and he read it, and we had the talk, about promise to tell me if you're ever feeling those things. And so um, later he did. He said, Mom, I'm having those thoughts. And we were able to address it and make sure he was safe. So you just never know. The data shows that more and more of our young people are having thoughts of suicide. It's very common now. And so it's important that we have safe ways to talk about it and ways to keep our kids safe. As we continue to, explore mental health and what it means, and as I live my life, I wrote a new book that just came out called Blessed Minds. And this came out of conversations that I have with people about mental health. I gave a talk at Princeton Seminary about mental health and faith. And afterwards, I was talking to the professor. We were walking to lunch, and I was like, so, what are you hearing from your students about mental health? And this is at Princeton, where a lot of the students for the Master of Divinity are coming right from college. So they're like mid 20s. And he said, well, a lot of them are self identifying as neurodivergent. They're coming to seminary with diagnosis of autism, ADHD, um, depression, anxiety. They're on meds, they're in recovery, they're in therapy, and they're ready to serve the church. And that really stopped me in my tracks. I was like, okay, I don't believe anyone in my church knows what neurodiversity is. So if someone were to walk in and say, I'm your new pastor, I'm neurodivergent, they would not know what that was. So I wrote this book really out of excitement about what the neurodiversity paradigm could and can mean for the church, that there's a whole generation of people called to ministry that are neurodivergent. So I loved researching this topic. I loved writing the book, and I'll share some highlights of it with you in a moment. I do want to say it's important in churches that we continue to give a message that it's okay to not be okay. Everywhere I go where we talk about mental health, there's still this like unspoken pressure that comes from tradition to be our best, look our best, put on our Sunday best. And we call that masking in the disability and mental health spaces. that we kind of suppress or cover up what's really going on, and we push through. Clergy do it, lay leaders do it, and our children pick that up. I remember talking to a youth group in Kentucky about mental health, and we're sitting around a table, and I said, do you feel like you can be honest with people at church about how you're really doing? Do you feel like you can really tell them what's going on? And I'll never forget the students were really quiet. And then they looked at me and said, "No, we don't we don't think we can really talk about what's actually happening." And I said, "Oh, why? I mean, can you tell me why?" And they said, "We grew up in this church, and they see us like we are little children, still running around, happy and smiling. They don't really see us for who we are now." And they said to me, "We don't want to disappoint them." So there's this sense of like pressure, right? Not to disappoint people. And I think that's true in families too, like with grandparents and grandchildren, or parent and your child. And in the research about children, youth mental health, really one of the best things we can do is model as adults transparency, honesty, and prioritizing mental health. So, for children and youth to see how we are navigating mental health, that we can say, I'm not okay. Like, I'm actually kind of depressed today. And so later, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to call my best friend. I'm going to snuggle my dog, and I'm going to make that therapy appointment. For children and teens and youth to have us role model that is so important, instead of just like smiling and being like, "I'm good, it's good, it'll be good, it's all good." So it's a paradigm shift in that way. And it's powerful. So my church has a youth group that we started as a mental health ministry. We realized that we wanted a safe place for LGBTQ youth, so neurodivergent youth who are also queer or LGBTQ, to come and have community. And one of the things we do at our youth group is something the youth helped create. It's called a high, a low, and a disco. So it's like your highlight that you want to share, the low point, like what's hard, what's not okay in your life, and then a disco is a random thing. And what I love about it is our youth share, but also the adult volunteers. Like we share just as honestly as the youth. And so that's a beautiful way to kind of role model, you know, just real things that happen. Like um, I went to a funeral, or I'm worried about this financial thing, or, I broke my foot. And so the kids can hear how we navigate these tough things and how we can find support together. And so the more we can say this um, in small groups, but also in worship, in a sermon, in a pastoral prayer, just kind of normalize it. It's so powerful. Next slide. There's a lot of ways to think about mental health and lots of definitions, and this is the one that I found is most comprehensive. It's from the World Health Organization. Talks about mental health as a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn and work well, and contribute to their community. Mental health is a basic human right. I love that last part, that it's a human right. And for people of faith, I add some faith language and I say mental health is a God given right. And so, with our mental health ministry, we can think of the advocacy part of that and how we can pay attention to our state, local, federal, how mental health is being treated, how it's getting funded. I'm serving nationally on the 988 Lifeline Marketing Communications Committee, but 988 as a federal program needs funding. And so I've been an advocate here in Indiana for our state to fund money for the people to answer the phone call, for the programs that get people to the right places for support. So I'm curious for you all in Iowa, what 988 looks like, how is it funded, and how faith communities can be advocates, right, for this God-given right of mental health. The next slide is another definition that is from Mental Health America. I serve on the national board of Mental Health America. It's a grassroots organization. They're most known for their free online mental health screening. So if you go to Mental Health America, I highly recommend checking out the screening tool. It's free, it's confidential, and you fill it out, and it'll give you results with all kinds of free resources, and it's used by people around the world. And the most common demographic are people in their 20s. So you imagine someone on the internet searching up something related to mental health, like depression and anxiety. They find this screening tool, and it's connecting people to resources. But they say that mental illness is a condition that affects our thinking, emotions, and behaviors. Mental illness can be influenced by our environment, our past trauma, and our biology. I think this is important to know because look at those things that mental illness affects: thinking, your emotions, and then how you behave. Well, that's like everything, right? Um, and it really affects our relationships with people. Mental illness and mental health is physical health. And we often wonder, what causes it? And so, as people of faith, it's important to have good theology around that. There's still, from our past tradition, bad theology that says mental illness is caused by sin, it's caused by demon possession, it's caused by punishment from God, or it's a curse. And like all of these things are like in the water we drink. And we have to intentionally dismantle this toxic theology and say in our sermons and our Bible studies, no, mental health is not demon possession. It's actually caused by trauma or by genetics or by the pandemic, right? I mean, lots of mental health really has sprung up since the pandemic. Um, but people feel ashamed because in our faith tradition, we have a lot of emphasis on the power of prayer, right? And so people will still say, have you prayed about that? Well, I will pray for you. And it's this idea of shame that, yes, I have prayed. Like, I do love Jesus and I still feel depressed. So to just give permission and say, it's not your fault you're depressed. There might be something biological. You might need some medicine. You might need a therapist. So it's like wearing glasses. And I see some of you wearing glasses. Somebody to say, give me your glasses. We're going to just throw those away. Instead, I want you to pray. Instead, let's read the Bible, and that will, cure your vision. We treat a lot of mental health the same way. And so part of the education with faith and mental health is to destigmatize it by saying this is not your fault. You're not a bad Christian. This is not God abandoning you or punishing you. It's just a reality because of our environment, because of the past trauma, because of systemic discrimination and racism and homophobia, misogyny, transphobia, maybe because of your genetics. All these things go into it. And right now, conversations about autism from RFK are very alarming because autism is also biological. It's also genetic. It runs in my family. We have generations of autism. And it's also complicated, why and how it comes up in certain people. It's not a disease, and we're not going to cure it by September. And so we've really got to educate ourselves and people in the church about how complicated the full spectrum is of mental health. The next slide that we'll look at is this idea of neurodiversity, which for me, when we think about destigmatizing mental health, that's where I really love the neurodiversity paradigm because instead of saying there's something wrong with my brain, we say there's something different. So, neurodiversity is a range of differences in brain function and behavior among humans. That's a basic definition. The neurodiversity paradigm says that there is no such thing as a normal brain. And I just like love that. Neurodiversity, it's a variation in neurology that is natural. None is more right or wrong than another. So for me, that's so judgment free. And the word neurodiversity, neuro is the neurons in your brain. Diversity comes from ecology and ecodiversity, right? A healthy ecosystem is diverse. And so Judy Singer came up with this word, um, and it's really resonated with a lot of people. Neurodiversity is not something your doctor will diagnose you with. And that's also why I like it. It's not a medical model, it's a cultural movement, it's a grassroots movement similar to the LGBTQ queer movement, where people say, hey, I think that's me. Or I think you're my people. I feel like I fit in with the queer community. Neurodiversity is very similar. It's a movement where people can self identify and say, that feels right. That feels like who I am. So it's not a diagnosis. The next slide looks at the word neurodivergent. And this is the word I heard at Princeton. The professor was like, yeah, my students are self identifying as neurodivergent. So, neurodivergent is a self identity that is experiential. So, it's how you experience yourself in the world, but it's also socio political. It's how you identify yourself among a community and how you experience society and how you identify in society and how society identifies you. Kisane Asumasu is the person who is credited with adapting that word neurodiversity from Judy Singer, and she created this word neurodivergent. And I love that she says it's a term of inclusion. It's not a term of exclusion. Neurodiversity is a natural part of a biodiverse world. We want neurodiversity. It's important to have all kinds of different minds. They're all blessed, and that's part of my theology of mental health is focusing on the blessedness of our minds. We're not cursed, we're not demon possessed, we're not sinners, but our brains are different. And because they're different, it's hard sometimes to fit in to a society that says you can only be a certain way. And so another opportunity we have with the conversation around neurodiversity is about accommodations and supports. And that's where my work in the disability field really is helpful because we don't often think about mental health as a disability. It's not for everyone. But what we can learn from disability community is that there is this openness to supporting each other and having needs met, not as something to be ashamed of or as a weakness, but as a way of showing love. So we'll get into that here. Disability justice, as I mentioned, is a really helpful way to think about the neurodiversity conversation. And it says that all bodies are unique and essential. All bodies have strengths and needs that must be met. We are powerful, not despite the complexities of our bodies, but because of them. That all bodies reflect diverse ability, race, gender, sexuality, class, nation, state, religion, neurodiversity. And we can't separate these parts of ourselves, they're all connected. Alice Wong, if you would like to learn more about disability justice, has written incredible books. One was just adapted for youth, disability visibility. So, highly recommend you check that out. She's a hero of mine. She's from Indiana, And she says that embracing difference generates progress and beauty. Can I get an amen? That just feels so good to say right now when the diversity is being dismantled and it's turned into a bad word, to actually say, no, diversity is how we make progress. In diversity is where we find beauty. And so the same is true with our minds, with our bodies. The more we can embrace diversity in our church, the more beautiful we will be and reflect God's beauty. So again, my reclaiming of blessed when it comes to disability and mental health. Blessed is a word that honors our whole story. Blessed means we're more than the shame and the stigma. Blessed means we're more than the labels. Blessed means we are holy and whole. We are blessed. And so I'm curious for you all as you think about neurodiversity, mental health, mental illness, disabilities, um, back to the storytelling, right? And that I shared this question of, what's the God story? How is God showing up in the midst of these realities? What God stories are we telling about disability, mental health, and neurodiversity? And I really want to encourage each of you to think about how you can be part of this movement of breaking the silence about mental illness with children at church, telling them the stories about how God takes care of our mental health. So there's a children's message I've done before where have a box of Kleenex and we're talking with the kids about, sometimes we get a runny nose and we're not feeling good. Maybe we'll get a fever and we have to go see a doctor. And sometimes we get medicine to help us get better. And I say, our brains are the same way. Sometimes we're feeling bad, we're crying a lot, we're not getting better. And sometimes we need to see a doctor that either can get us medicine or help us in other ways through therapy to feel better. And just to kind of say it like that. Another thing to talk about with children and families is this idea of physical health and taking care of our teeth and how often our kids, go every 6 months to get their teeth cleaned. They're looking for cavities, right? What if we thought of our brain hygiene the same way as we thought about dental hygiene? We want to prevent cavities in our teeth. Well, we also want to prevent cavities in our brain, and we need to do a lot more prevention. So, just as every child hopefully has a dentist, every child really needs a therapist, a play therapist, some kind of mental health therapist that they're in relationship with every 6 months. Get a checkup from the neck up. That's the best thing I can say. However, you can influence the families you work with, the children, to get everyone in a relationship with a therapist. Sadly, one of my son's good friends, she has shared with our family that she really wants a therapist, that her mental health is struggling, and her mom and dad refuse. They say, no, you do not need a therapist. And so there's that stigma and shame that a lot of families and parents have, and they are resistant, to getting their children help. And frankly, my niece Sydney, who died, there was a lot of stigma because her mom was a child psychiatrist and in the Air Force, and she was afraid of the records about her family's health and was very reluctant to get her daughter more psychiatric help. And so, if you have any way at all to provide more resources to your families and youth, bring therapists on site, have resource fairs for you to break the silence, for you to tell your stories. All of this together helps end the stigma and it will help save lives. And it's faithful. It's sharing the good news of the gospel that God loves everyone, no matter what, no matter who you are or where you are on your mental health journey. I want to share a few more resources with you as you're doing more work in this. Again, to ask that question, what are your God stories? To really encourage you to dig deep and think about your personal God stories about disability, mental health, and neurodiversity, and for you to find ways to share them, whether that's a sermon, a mission moment, a newsletter, a Bible study. It's so powerful for you to take off that mask of being perfect and say, look, I'm human too. This is what I struggle with. The good news is that I know I'm not alone, and together we can support each other um, and we can get through it. I mentioned I'm on the committee for 988. This is a text call message. Um, it's something that we really try to get the word out. And September 8th is 988 Day. It's on a Monday, but we're hoping that churches the Sunday before will do also a big push for 988. It's a great resource that they're trying to direct calls to that number instead of 911. And so it's really trying to respond to people who just need someone to talk to any time of day. And it's not only for acute crisis, it's also what they call a warm line, WARM. So just anyone who's feeling lonely. I was on a call with the 988 people yesterday. They said they're getting a lot of calls from older people, seniors, 70 and older, who are just feeling very lonely and down and needing support. So it's for all ages. NAMI, if you don't know about NAMI, it's a national nonprofit. They have chapters in every big city. They are great about doing support groups. Our church donates space. And so once a month, a support group meets at our church. They have one for families, and that's who meets at my church, but they also have a peer group. So people with a diagnosis meet. So that's a great idea if you're hoping to do something more. Reach out to NAMI and just say, hey, do you need a space? Do you want to come and look at our space? They also have trained volunteers who can go out and share their stories. So if you want to have a speaker come to your church or your event, I highly recommend the NAMI folks. Mental health first aid training, this is really the gold standard. A lot of times churches will say, we just want more education. We want to understand this more. Mental health first aid does an online training. It's 8 hours, and then you get a certificate. You can have them come in person. So this is also a great thing if your church wants to do more. Have a mental health first aid training at your church or do a group one on Zoom. They have a special training for youth as well. So highly recommend this training to you. Oh, you know someone who's a trainer. That's great. Deacon Lori. I love that. I mentioned earlier that Mental Health America has these free online screenings. Because sometimes people are like, well, I have these symptoms and I have that, but I'm not sure if it's anything to be concerned about. This is the place to go to get a free online screening, Mental Health America. Trevor Project, we know LGBTQ folks have a higher risk of suicide, especially now. There's so much discrimination happening towards transgender youth. The Trevor Project is the place to go for resources, support. They also have a crisis text line and call line. So your churches can share that resource out and let people know about it. NeuroWild, if you want to go deeper into neurodiversity, there's a lot of cool stuff happening in the secular education space. And so NeuroWild is the name of a woman's work that she does on Facebook and Instagram. She's putting out free curriculum for teachers, which I think can adapt beautifully to the church. She does like cartoon drawings. They're so brilliant and super helpful about how we can communicate and engage with neurodivergent youth and children. So definitely recommend checking that out. In my denomination, the United Church of Christ, we've created a mental health network. And one of the resources we have is a training and a guide for churches to become a wise church. It's a designation they can vote on. And so they are welcoming, inclusive, supportive, engaged for mental health. It's open to any denomination. So they have a coach that will help you learn about it, and you can get certified as Episcopalians. You can be part of the WISE movement. So that's a website you can check out. There's also a great resource for worship. If you want to have like a mental health Sunday, there's a free guide you can download with sermons, liturgies, prayers, hymn recommendations. So just a resource there I'm happy to share with you all. Check it out. I am also part of the disability ministries of the United Church of Christ. So wanted to connect you all to them as well and their website. We have a program called A2A, Accessible to All, and it's a way to help churches think about, are you really accessible? It's more than just ramps and elevators. It's really about your attitude. And so, do you include people with disabilities in leadership? Are they able to get to the pulpit and be a liturgist? Is your pulpit accessible for a wheelchair user to be the preacher? Um, do you have people with disabilities in leadership? How are you celebrating the diversity of different kinds of disabilities? This is our symbol for A2A. So my church right now is working on being more accessible to all. And one thing we just did was we turned our bulletins into large print bulletins. So instead of like 11 size font, we're up to 16 size font. And you know what we realized? Everybody likes it. Like it helps everyone, including the minister who, it helps me read the bulletin better. So there's little things we can do that are free or low cost just to help improve the accessibility. So please stay in touch. We'll have time for conversation, but if you have any questions, there's my email, sarahgriffithlund@gmail.com. And I have a website where you can learn more about my books at sarahgriffithlund.com. This is about a movement. It's about connection. It's about doing this together. And so I'd really love to hear from you and stay connected. So thank you. I think we'll have some time for conversations together. I love the note about universal design. Definitely, we think we're making things accessible for a certain group of people, but that idea of universal design is that it then becomes accessible for everyone. And the curb cut is a nice example. The curb cut allows you to push a wheelchair from a curb, but it's also good for someone with strollers, pushing their dog or a child in a stroller. So I know I shared a lot, and I'm going to catch my breath and see if there are any comments or questions from you all. And I try to be an open book. Um, and so, any questions that you have?
We did have a few in the chat, if you want me to go through those. Katie asked, were the mental health professionals or suicide prevention specialists that you worked with to vet the information in the survival guide?
Yes, so I worked with both child, a nurse psychologist, and social workers. So it has been vetted. I'm always open to take feedback. In future editions, we can make changes. So if there's feedback you have to share, I'd love that. But yes, thank you for asking that. That's an important question. I have a master's in social work. So I do have some background, but I do like to partner with experts and sensitivity readers to help make sure it's the best resource it can be.
Go ahead, Marilyn.
Thank you. Thank you. I serve primarily Native communities. And the big catchphrase about mental health for them is intergenerational trauma. And that's not a phrase that I heard you speak about, although what you shared about your family history, that is absolutely part of what's going on. So, are you going to think about doing a focus on intergenerational trauma?
That's powerful. Thank you for naming that. There's so much work to be done in that space, intergenerational trauma. Um, I have not done a deep dive with that, but that would be helpful for me to take some more time to think about that.
Yeah, I mean, because there's so many facets to it. It can be chronic poverty, it can be um, life experience of colonization, it can be all kinds of different things, which are the source of the trauma,
Mm,
right? But it does everything, including change our DNA. So it's
that's right.
really something that would be an interesting way to move forward. I attended a 5-day course over at Winnebago Reservation about intergenerational trauma. And even it was 5 days all day, we still barely touched on it, you know? So,
Yeah. I do talk a little bit about it in Blessed Youth. There's some good books that have been written about it. If you all can help me remember the names, The Body Keeps a Score, I think, is one that addresses that. Um, Ezekiel, there's a biblical exegesis on the book of Ezekiel, which I found really helpful about trauma and looking at intergenerational trauma because the author of this interpretation of Ezekiel had a background, had like a trauma informed reading of Ezekiel. So that I highly recommend that book. So powerful.
well, my people don't read books very often or very much.
Yeah. But the story of Ezekiel is one you could tell, like it has a biblical story about trauma.
Yeah,
Is really powerful. Thank you for sharing, Marilyn.
sure.
Hannah says she loves the idea of the disco. The youth group I lead often enjoy the high-low discussions and even ask to share them. Yeah, I was thinking about how I can incorporate that into our youth events. Katie asked, commented, thinking about the term disability, wondering is there a more empowering term, like ability diversity or
Yeah, oh,
ability
I love that
divergent?
question. Yeah, so there's lots of conversation around language. I found that with my first book, Blessed Are the Crazy, that word crazy is can be very stigmatizing, can be really off-putting. I've had lots of people say, I won't read your book because of the title. I gave a talk at Stetson University when the book came out, and they were advertising it with flyers, and the psychology department took down the flyers because it had the word crazy. They were not happy. So we all have our own experience of language. For me, it's about reclaiming. It's like the word queer, and in disability spaces, they reclaim the word crip, CRIP. Like you can call someone a crip as a cripple, and that's derogatory. But when you're in the community, you can reclaim it as a source of empowerment. So for me, as an 80s kid, crazy was the word that we used about our family. And so for my story, I have reclaimed it with a blessed, just to say, yeah, it was this thing, but it's really this other thing. All that to say, this word disability, some people love it, some people don't. So it really depends on the circles you're in. With the United Church of Christ, we've really claimed it, and we're like, disability is not a bad word. There's a beautiful disability community related to doing the work of justice, but other people don't like the word. They want to use other words for it. So I think the suggestion I have is talk about it. Talk about the word. How does it make you feel? What are other words that you prefer? And really just honoring that. Same thing with like person first language or identity first. So it could be like, I have autism or I'm autistic, and people have different preferences. So at the end of the day, it's really getting in relationship and saying, how can I best honor you? How do you like to talk about this?
Any other questions
I
or
wanted to
comments?
say that I was really glad you brought up mental health first aid. Um, some of the work that I did before I was retired was to really try to also not only get rid of stigma about mental illness, but also to kind of what I say de-gild, take off the varnish of mental health professionals, because sometimes people think the only people who can do anything to help others who are suffering with a mental illness is it's only those people who have the PhD or the MSW or the LASW or whatever behind their name, and that's not true. We all of us can support people who are suffering from a mental illness. And so that mental health first aid is an example of something that is some training that people can do to help that as well. So anyway, I just wanted to
Yeah.
say that. And one thing we did in our church that with 988, you might be interested, is we do have flyers, a little just one, I can't remember, there's a certain term for it. It's just like a little cardboard thing with 988 on it, with information about how to utilize 988 and what it's for. And so every
Wonderful.
pew has that. And then we also got posters up and what we put around the church about 988. But that's been a couple of years ago. We probably need to maybe revise them a little bit, because people probably have gotten a little too used to those being
Yeah.
around, and maybe we need to change them up.
Look for the new toolkit. Should be coming out this summer for the 988 day. Yeah. As you all have heard, there's a loneliness epidemic. And so there's a lot about the friendship, the companionship. There's so much that's in our DNA of church. Um, you know, Potluck therapies, getting together. I'm a big movie buff, so I saw the Marvel movie Thunderbolt. So if you want to go to a movie about mental health, it's about depression. And not to spoil it, but there's a scene where everyone just kind of comes and like does like a dog pile, and they're like, "You're not alone. I know you feel alone. Trust us. We're here with you. We want to be with you." And so there are beautiful ways as church we can do that for children, youth, for older folks. That human connection is really powerful. Lisa Miller is at Columbia University. She wrote a book called The Awakened Brain, so she's tapped into the science around spirituality. And she says, there is something powerful about knowing you're not alone. And spirituality is that connection to God, a higher power of unconditional love. And the more we can nurture people's sense of being connected to a loving being, God, that also really helps build resiliency. So, connection to someone else and connection to God can help all of us feel less alone. Shout out from Hannah about Lisa Miller. I just love her. She herself is Jewish, but she writes for a very interfaith audience, and so does great work. And it's an exciting field. So I would encourage you, all of you, to go deep into this intersection of mental health and spirituality, and tap into that. We don't realize, I think we sometimes in the church take it for granted how powerful this message is of God's unconditional love, being held um, by a compassionate, loving God who will never let you go, who loves you no matter what. Um, it's really beautiful, and we all need to hear it. Um, can't hear that enough, that message of love.
Well, thank you so very much for being here with us today. It was
Thank you all.
lovely.
Thank you so much. Really good to be with you. Blessings on your ministries.